Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. And here we are, we're in Booker season all over again. So we've just had the long list come out, and while it's still fresh in my mind, I wanted to talk about Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. And I will eventually go into some spoilers about this book, but the first part of this should be relatively spoiler free. So feel free to log off when you need to from this, but essentially, yeah, this is a really interesting little book, this one, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about it. It's a very short book compared to at least a few on the list, and it's just this very quiet, subtle book in so many ways. And I think looking at some of the reviews, for some people that the subtlety of the book has been its appeal. For some people, the subtlety of the book has been the thing that they've liked least about it. They found it almost too quiet. I think that the subtlety of this book really works and really pays off for it. So essentially, the overall story of the book is a young girl and her sisters, but Gopi is our main character, and she is she's 11. She is playing squash quite regularly at a local kind of place called Western Lane, and squash is kind of a thing that she to some degree enjoys herself, but is also largely part of a regimen that her dad is putting her on. And he is particularly kind of training her quite hard. He's sort of really pushing her. And this is all sort of coming in the after effects of her loss, and particularly the loss of her mother. And so this book, and that was right at the beginning of the book, that's not a spoiler, that is sort of literally the opening of the book. But so we get this sort of, this really short but kind of focused book of her life as she slowly moves through and kind of not only plays a lot of squash, we get a lot of squash in this book, but in doing so, she's sort of slowly working out a little bit more about who she is. She's dealing with loss. She's dealing with her the sort of parental expectations on her, her father's expectations that she's going to be this good squash player. And in the meantime, it sort of just it stirs up all these other things in the family. She is really kind of trying to work out how she can kind of cope with everything. Her relationship with her sisters is sort of strained by it, not only because their lives sort of diverge, but also because she is just so hyper focused on doing this, on being this sort of squash player, on making her dad feel better, and all of these things sort of really drive so much of her life. And what I think I found really quite effective about this book is just the way that it really deals with the small spaces in between those things. So we get a passage of her talking either passionately or dispassionately about squash, depending on how she's doing at the time. We get a passage where she is talking about the death of her mother. And then in the spaces in between, we get these gorgeous little moments where she is trying to understand where she fits in the world. She's 11. Her like whole life is changing. Everything's changing around her, and she has this one thing that she can focus on, squash. But then what happens if that thing isn't enough? What happens if that thing goes wrong? So much is put into this that it's really quite demanding and really quite effective, really quite overwhelming for her. And so I found the little descriptions of the sport itself actually really quite interesting in its own way, because it was almost always followed up by something quite profound in the spaces in between, or even the way that she talks about competition in something like squash, which I've never played, but it's so intense as a sport from what I understand. And that intensity, particularly such as in this book, sort of drives the way that she thinks about so much of the world, because if she's competing against somebody, she is very aware that she is not only in that physically on the court with one other human who she is also trying to outgame and outmaneuver. So she's already sort of juggling these two people that she's managing. She's managing herself, she's managing how she responds to this other person, but there's also her managing her father's expectations, particularly when he's watching, the expectations put upon her by these greats. So this guy called Jungir, who is this famous squash player, apparently. I don't know, if I don't follow that world, at least famous in the world of this book. And he is also sort of held up as, she needs to reach this level to make her father proud. And so I thought it was really quite clever how the moments on court feel like they're really doing something. And quite a lot of good sports writing does that, right? It kind of takes the idea of running or football or tennis or whatever, and it looks at the kind of intensity of emotions and what's going on in that world as they go. And I think that's actually where this book is really successful, in taking those moments of intensity in the sport, of her thoughts in between shots, of her focus on what she's going to do next, and then how it all kind of hangs together. So I think it was a really quite effective book, even, maybe not my like top read of the year, but a book that I really enjoyed and found a lot of beauty in. And with that, let's go on to some light spoilers, or not even light spoilers, but onto spoilers. But if you do need to click off, feel absolutely free to do so, and I'll go into those spoilers now. So, to spoil the book, to some degree, later as we get into this book, as the narrative starts to guide us towards, things are not always as they seem. So the family dramas start to really build up, and we get a lot around health, and particularly the health of Gopi herself, but that of her father, of her various other sort of wider family. And there are these really incredible moments where Gopi is injured, and so suddenly everything that's been built around this sport, around her ability to play squash very well, is the thing that anchors her to the world and anchors her to her family and makes her father proud, and is some kind of way of almost being her mother. And actually there's a line at one point about how she suddenly looks like her mother, and for Gopi's father, that's quite an emotional and profound thing. And so for everybody around her, there's this, she has the force and the pressure of having to live up to her dead mother's image almost, and to kind of be her mother and be better than everybody else to prove that this family is still doing okay. And I think those are particularly some of the parts where I found it really quite powerful in this book, that she has all this pressure on her at 11 to do anything she can to hold the family together. And the thing that she has to do is just keep playing squash, but she gets injured because her body is under so much strain. She's 11, but she's also got, this really intense training regimen from her father, and also occasionally she starts getting dizzy, she starts getting tired, and she can't really keep up with all of that. And so I thought that was incredibly powerful, just the way that she tries to deal with something so big, the death of her mother and the rest of her family sort of falling apart in various ways. And the only way she can really hold them together is to hold it together on court in a physically demanding sport, when she's already tired, where she's injured at times, where she's really going through it. And I think those passages just had so much power to them. And for such a quiet book, though, they really burned those passages. They were still quiet, but there was a kind of an intensity to the quietness there that I thought was really powerful. So anyway, yeah, I see why the book got longlisted. It's one of those books that I don't think I would have otherwise picked up, partly just because, basically I'd heard a couple of people saying it could be eligible and sort of gave it a little look, but typically it's a book I'd seen around a couple of times and thought it sounded interesting, but never maybe enough to pick it up. And I think actually the Booker is often very good for championing books like this that actually really deserve a nice readership, but may otherwise not kind of get that attention because it seems niche, being about sport or whatever. Anyway, I've been rambling about this book. I've been Bob the Booker. I hope you enjoy it if you do read it. Take care and speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.